If you guys have any questions on writing, storytelling, or anything along those lines, feel free to drop them in the comments. Happy to answer them today. We're here for about an hour. Then I got to get going, but happy to help you guys out with some writing and storytelling questions. Have any advice on how to make a power system unique and stand out? The most important part of any power system is, as I'm sure you've heard, the limitations and consequences of that power system. So those, I think, are the places where you can really make a power unique and make it stand out because the consequences can be memorable. My favorite example of this is from My Hero Academia. We have Deku. Deku gets the power of All Might, and All Might is basically kind of a Superman-y kind of character, super strong, with a lot of power, a lot of speed. What makes it unique, though, unforgettably unique, in fact, at least towards the beginning of the series, is Deku gets all this power in his frail child body, and every time he tries to use that power, it breaks his limbs. He breaks fingers, he breaks arms, he breaks his legs, and that consequence of using the power is what makes him and his power so memorable in a way that other super strong characters are not. So that's what I would recommend if you're trying to make a more memorable and unique power system that stands out, is look at the consequences of your power system, the limitations and the consequences, and then give them a consequence or limitation that is very unique. That's where you want to add something unique. Any advice on how to make best friends transition to lovers without it feeling forced? If you're going to transition best friends to lovers, the first thing you have to establish is what has kept them from being lovers until this point, because they're close, both they know each other well. So what has kept it from happening? Because that's why a lot of people don't find best friends to lovers believable, because they sit there and wonder, you two have been interacting for years. You're both attractive, and you and you both seem to have crushes on each other, and you have not acted upon this at all. Why not? So you need to answer that question, and it needs to be compelling. The other thing you need to do, the second thing you need to do for a best friends to lovers relationship, is you need to figure out what the trigger is that's going to make them start seeing each other that way, or to start acting upon the feelings they have, because once again, they've been friends for a long time. So what is happening right now that is making this the moment where they choose to come closer and act upon their feelings? So think of a trigger you can do, whether it is they're both suddenly out of relationships, someone talks to them and say, hey, why haven't you ever hooked up with so-and-so? And that gets them thinking, or you need to come up with some kind of a trigger. So those are the two things I would say for the most part. Figure out, one, why have they not gotten together yet in all the years of their friendship? And two, what is making them act on their relationship now? If you can answer those two questions very clearly, then I think it'll be a relatively unforced relationship. Any tips to write faster? I know what to write, but just can't get the words out. I find setting a timer very helpful. So I mentioned earlier that I like to write at least 30 minutes a day. That's my general goal. And when I know I only have 30 minutes, I find myself feeling a rushing urge to get more in that time. And so I'm much more willing to write forward and just keep going and get words out when I have a clear minimal time limit. So that's what I'd recommend you try if you haven't, is set a timer for 30 minutes and say, I'm going to write for 30 minutes and I need to write as much as I can. The pressure of the timer can be surprisingly helpful. I used to think I had to have at least a few hours to write. That's what I used to think. But once I started having myself do even just a 30-minute writing session or less if I have to, it opened up so much writing time for me. It's been great. Highly recommend it. What's the best way to make a villain the main character? If you're going to have a villain as the main character, what you need to realize is villains have a lot of unlikable things about them. They might hurt people. They might be manipulative. They might be jerks in general. They might just be unlikable people. And so what you have to do is think, what about them is going to be attractive to the reader? Because even though they're doing bad things, you need to have a reason for readers to want to actually follow them. For example, are they fiercely intelligent and clever, which is an attractive quality? Because that's why we like Light Yagami from Death Note and Dexter from Dexter, not Dexter's Lab. So we need something attractive about them. Or is it like the movie Nightcrawler, where Jake Gyllenhaal plays a guy who goes and gets footage for news shows, but he goes to where violent things are happening and even causes some violent things. And he does some terrible things in the movie, but we're intrigued by him and we follow him because he's very motivated and resourceful, and he's talented at what he does, and we find those qualities attractive, and so we are curious enough to keep following him even though we deplore what he's doing. And so that's what you have to do if you're going to have a main character who's a villain, is you need to find out what is making us attracted to him despite the bad things they do. And so that's the first and most important thing you need to decide, because if they're just a completely unlikable person, then we're not gonna follow the story, because we won't care. We won't be invested in them. Do you ever think that people won't like or don't like the scene you wrote? Yeah, definitely. I can tell you right now, everything you write will be disliked by at least some people if you show it to enough people, because that's just how it is. Art has a certain level of objectivity to it, but it is also largely subjective, and people will react differently. Even if you technically do something very well, there will be people who dislike it. So I am very confident that there have been people who've read my stories or even just scenes and just didn't like them at all. Because that's what it means to create, and that's what it means to write, is to make something that some people will love and some people will hate. I don't ponder it, because I just know it's a truth, and it's a truth we all need to accept. It's not like you're not a bad writer because a person disliked a scene you wrote or a story you wrote. Like, because every writer has stories and scenes and things that some people don't like. It's just a fact of creative life. Do you have any advice on writing fight scenes? One thing that I think people undervalue when writing fight scenes that I think can really add a lot to a fight scene is when you really take the time to build out the set for the fight. One of the problems I think people run into with fight scenes is they don't know what to do to mix up the variety of actions. Like, you have people punching, you have people kicking, and it can only be so entertaining for so long just having repetitive kicks and punches. And so what's really good about knowing your setting really well and having that down is you can add props, you can add obstacles, you can have them move through the environment, and that way there's more movement and dynamism to the actual fight scene. And it becomes less of just punching and kicking. It becomes a lot more than that. A really good example of this is the beginning of Dean Koontz's Odd Thomas has a really great chase/fight scene at the beginning of it. Here, I'll read an excerpt of it for you, because I really do like it. I think it's a great fight scene. The main character, Odd Thomas, can see ghosts, and a little ghost of a girl has told him that this guy murdered her, and so he's chasing this guy down. Blacktop to concrete to grass, alongside the house that lay across the street from Mrs. Sanchez's place, through the rear yard to a wrought iron fence and over, then across a narrow alleyway, up a slumped stone wall, Harlow Landerson ran and clambered and flung himself. I wondered where he might be going. He couldn't outrun either me or Justice, and he certainly couldn't outrun who he was. Beyond the slumped stone wall lay a backyard, a swimming pool. Dappled with morning light and tree shadows, the water glimmered in shades of blue from sapphire to turquoise, as might a trove of jewels left by long-dead pirates who had sailed the sea since vanished. On the farther side of the pool, behind a sliding glass door, a young woman stood in pajamas, holding a mug of whatever brew gave her the courage to face the day. When he spotted the startled observer, Harlow changed directions toward her. Maybe he thought he needed a shield, a hostage, whatever he wasn't looking for coffee. I closed on him, snared his shirt, hooked him off his feet. The two of us plunged into the deep end of the pool. Having banked a summer's worth of desert heat, the water wasn't cold. Thousands of bubbles like shimmering showers of silver coins flipped across my eyes, rang against my ears. Thrashing, we touched bottom, and on the way up, he kicked, he flailed. With elbow or knee or foot, he struck my throat. Although the impeding water robbed the blow of most of its force, I gasped and swallowed, choked on the taste of chlorine flavored with tanning oil. Losing my grip on Harlow, I tumbled in slow-mo through the undulant curtains of green light, blue shadow, and broke the surface into a spangles of sunshine. I was in the middle of the pool, and Harlow was at the edge. He grabbed the coping and jacked himself onto the concrete deck. Coughing, venting atomized water from both nostrils, I splashed noisily after him. As a swimmer, I have less potential for Olympic competition than for drowning. On a particularly dispirited night when I was 16, I'm going to skip that. Anyway, then he follows him into the house. He has a good, clear layout of the living room. We move from the living room up to the upstairs where a kid is, and the bad guy grabs a kid. And like we just have such a clear view of the space in the story that it makes the fight scene a lot more dynamic because we're moving and progressing through a space. The fight is evolving, things are changing, and it's not just punches and kicks. It's actually navigating a space. And so that's one tip I think is undervalued in writing fight scenes, which is to really understand the space of the fight and understand it so that you can have the characters move through it, use props, overcome obstacles, or use obstacles to their advantage, and that can lead to a much more dynamic fight. How do you write when you don't feel inspired? So I know it's really tempting to only ever write when we have this excitement inside us, when we have a clear, fiery vision in our mind of what a story should be and what a story can be if we just sit down and write. That's the most fun time to write, but those moments of divine inspiration are very rare. They're very far and few between. So how do you write when you don't have that inspiration? And the way you do it is you just sit down and write. And I don't just mean like just force yourself out of nowhere. The best way to do it is to literally come up with a schedule for yourself. Because when you don't have inspiration, the best way to get inspired is to sit down and start working on something. Because the inspiration can come to you as you're working. It might not be super exciting or fun for the first few minutes you're working on a story, or when you're working on that draft of a chapter or whatever it may be, or just beginning world building. It may not feel fun right away, but you'll start to get into the world, you start to get some ideas, and you'll start to spark interest. You'll start to get inspired. And so that's why if you're not feeling inspired, the best way to get inspired is to just dive into a project. And so the best way to do that is, in my experience anyway, to come up with a schedule for yourself. Force yourself to show up and to write regularly throughout the week, whether it's 3 days a week, 4 days a week, or I like to do a little bit every day, even if it's just one line or 30 minutes of writing each day. That gets you seated down. You don't feel inspired at first, but then you start working, and all of a sudden stuff starts to spark in your head. You start to get a little excited, and you keep going, and you feel inspired. Now, saying that, you won't always get inspired, but that's the best way to get inspired again, is to immerse yourself in the story and give it another shot. Does every story need a theme? So it depends on what your definition of theme is. There's a lot of disagreement actually about what a theme is in the terms of literature. There's a lot of different competing definitions. The ones I find most helpful are the thematic subject and the thematic statement. Now, a thematic subject is the very broad overall kind of subject or topic of the story. So like love, it's the big words, war, ambition, and that's the thematic concept. The thematic statement is what the writer has to say about that subject. So that could be love is messy, ambition leads to corruption, or like whatever message you're trying to get across. So all stories, for the most part, will inevitably have a thematic subject because they naturally arise. Like if you're writing a love story, love is inevitably going to be part of the story. It's going to be a theme whether you like it or not. So those thematic subjects are inevitable in stories. And so does a story need a theme? It's not that it needs it so much that a thematic subject will always exist. Now, a thematic statement, however, if a writer's trying to make a message out of a theme, that is the thing that is optional. That some writers like to incorporate them, some writers don't. Some like to just leave it more to, because thematic subjects are more about exploring an experience of the human condition, whereas thematic statements are about actively commenting on those experiences. And so you have to have the thematic subject because it's impossible to write a story without one existing unless you wrote something just so disjointed that nothing arose. But you can write stories without thematic statements. All right, everybody, I have to head off now. Thank you all so much for jumping on the live stream with me today. We'll be doing one again next week, Saturday at 2 p.m. Central Time. And yeah, I hope to see you guys next week. You all have a good week.